Hi, everyone. Welcome to the International Student Crossroads 4, Demand for Canada during the COVID-19 pandemic webinar. My name is Christine Walk, and I'm the Director of Client Partnerships for IDP Connect Canada. We are thrilled to welcome today's speakers to talk and walk us through some of the results of our fourth installment of the International Student Crossroads Survey, looking at the international student perceptions amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Jonah, did you want to start introductions?
Thank you, Christine. Hello, everyone. I'm Jonah Duffin. I'm the Director of External Relations at IDP Connect, a global role based out of London, UK, working closely with colleagues in Australia, New Zealand, UK and Ireland, North America, which is US and Canada.
Thank you so much, Jonah. Mike?
Thanks, Christine. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Henniger, and I'm a Senior Consultant with IDP Connect Canada. I work with the IDP, IQ, and Connect teams to deliver bespoke data and research consulting projects with our clients across Canada. Really pleased to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So I thought we'd kick things off with who are we, who is IDP in 2021? IDP is unrivaled in providing the higher education sector with trusted, full funnel strategic recruitment solutions. From initial search through to the student's arrival on shore, IDP offers students and institutions a seamless, omni-channel journey that places human interaction at its heart, supported and complemented by our digital platforms. At IDP, we are proud to be able to say that as we evolve and build our business, we do so with the student at the center. Whatever the stage of their journey, we are by their side, available 24/7 by our digital platforms, and building trusted human relationships through our network of qualified counselors. By placing students at the heart of all that we do, we are providing students with the right advice and institutions with the right students. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to look at how we do this really in three ways. One is through diversity and volume. IDP is a global company with both digital and counselor reach across major source countries. By leveraging our technology, we have widened our reach and are connecting with more students than ever before. Last year, our websites reached more than 100 million prospective students in their search of their study abroad dreams. The second way we do this is through our trusted human connections. So we have continued to invest in our network of counselors and now have a physical network of student-facing offices in over 30 countries. We have over 1,300 counselors throughout this network, and we are embedded within the markets in which we operate. And three, and finally, we have started consulting as strategic partners and experts by your side. Our omni-channel platform means that we have the most comprehensive international student data set in the world. And this really gives our clients the most up-to-date, comprehensive picture of international student data set in the world. We call this data and our analytics IDP IQ. And these are our consulting services. This is really leading the shift from relying on retrospective hindsight to forward-looking intelligence, from descriptive to predictive analytics, while also using our educational experts to provide actionable insights for planning. And this slide here really gives that visual of our global reach and local expertise. And this is where across these 33 connected sites in over 15 languages, we pull the data that we use for our IQ consulting services. So moving on to the next slide, we will talk a bit about what we're looking at. We'll go through an overview of what we will be looking at today. So we are going to be looking at the immediate impact of the pandemic on international student intentions and perceptions. So first, we're going to look at the top of the funnel student search behavior. Then we're going to move on to destination perceptions across the English-speaking destination countries. Then we're going to look at short-term student intentions, attitude towards delivery, so that's course and program delivery, and then attitudes towards vaccination and quarantine. So from here, let's move on to the next slide, and I will pass it over to Mike.
Great, thanks, Christine. And as we kind of go in and look at some of this high-level search behavior that we see across our platforms, kind of like to set the context of really why this excites me. And you know, working in international student recruitment for so long in Canada, I always feel that we've always been looking at historic data and whatever visa success rates, and then using this to plan what we're going to be doing in the coming months. what we're going to take a look at is really the most up-to-date data showing what is impacting students' search behavior. What are they looking at, and how are policies and perceptions towards different countries really impacting how students view Canada? So we can skip to the next slide. We'll see where we get this search data, and Christine went over a little bit of this, but you know, we have real-time course and market demand data from over 100 million searches a year, 150,000 plus courses, 1,600 higher education institutions in 30 destination countries. So really, this is the set of data that can be used to really look at where things are now, but also to predict where they're going. I love the analogy that Randall Martin used at the webinar the other day that we did, when we did the IQ webinar, about the swarm behavior, about how recruitment and international student recruitment strategy is often like a bunch of small kids at a soccer game, and they just follow the ball around in a swarm of where they think they should be. What we see that our data does is allow us to get out of that swarm and look at things from a much higher view to be able to make very good strategic decisions. So let's look at the first search behavior slide, which looks at just online versus face-to-face. And you can see what this looks like over the past year or so. And you see the precipitous drop on face-to-face search demand at the early stages of the pandemic, and how much search and demand for face-to-face education dropped. It slowly started to rebound, and we've seen some recovery there. And then when we look at this on the bottom where it shows the online, it never really reflected this. It has stayed steady throughout the pandemic. So the pandemic didn't make people want to study online more. I mean, they had to study online, but it didn't really change the behavior that they were looking for. I mean, I think one of the big takeaways on this slide is that really we are starting to see a recovery, but we're not still at post-pandemic search volumes and demand that we saw. We're still in a little bit of a recovery phase there. On to the next slide, please. This one, for me, it's over every time I see this. Whenever we look at it, it's a powerful slide, and it just shows the top 4 destinations of Canada, UK, US, and Australia. And there's a couple of really key takeaways here. First of all, you can see some of the big announcements that happened. So in the US, you see this big jump in search right in the middle of the slide there. And that was right around the election, which basically functioned for the US as a massive branding campaign for international education. All eyes were focused on the US, and it really allowed them to brand their country, in this case, in a favorable way. The other thing looking here is the Australia, and I spoke with a long-time colleague just last night in Australia, and how from a practitioner's point of view, the beating that they're taking there, he told me tens of thousands of layoffs and really no sign of positivity to come in. So Australia has just taken a major beating here from the pandemic. Canada, the good thing here is really shown strength and resilience throughout this. But, and I'll bring this back in the takeaway slide that I speak at the end, what we really have to be concerned here is that the juggernaut of the US is definitely back. And we see this search demand increasing, and the US really starting to take its place as the most attractive destination for international students with the Biden administration there. So I think that needs to speak as a word of caution for Canadian institutions that yes, we've been enjoying this amazing run, and we still have so many strong value propositions, but just the capacity, just the amount of seats that the American education system has, as well as really that perception as the US is so many students having the American dream and really wanting to go there. This is something you need to be very mindful of, and we can definitely not get complacent as we come out of the pandemic, knowing that really the competition from the UK and the US is fierce. And then, you know, when Australia opens its borders, that yellow line is going to spike up immediately. So this is the type of data that we're looking at on a day-to-day basis here. Next slide, please. At this point, I'll pass it back to Jonah, who will dig into the Crossroads Force Survey data itself.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, Christine. So yeah, I'm going to take you through the Crossroads data. So Crossroads is a series of research that we've carried out throughout the pandemic. This is the 4th round. and just going to give you an overview of some of the key findings. So we produce this research and we make it into clear, filterable dashboards that our clients can look at whenever they want and search via different destinations and different source countries and other different methods in order to get the information they need on student intentions and student behaviour throughout the pandemic. So what the surveys so far have told us throughout the pandemic is that students overall have a real commitment to commencing their studies as planned. We've seen that increasing survey after survey until the most recent one that we just carried out in March this year, where we saw a slight drop in students' intention to study. However, when looking at this data, it's always really important to understand that will differ depending on where the students are from. So often in South Asia, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, we've seen students really looking to study, to get onto campus and to get that face-to-face education. From places like China, we've often seen a reluctance and a more of a safety first approach to them wanting to leave their home country and to study overseas during the pandemic. So overall, students really looking to study as they had planned to do so, not wanting the pandemic to get in the way, but important to recognise those different attitudes depending on the country the students are from. We've also seen an increasing acceptance that students in order to study are going to have to study in different ways. So as Mike clearly pointed out, students don't want to in any increasing numbers to study online, but there is an acceptance that that hybrid blended model of teaching is going to be needed if they are to be able to study. And also they're willing to quarantine when they arrive in country as well, in order to get that in-country, on-campus experience, which is so important to them. So yeah, really important that we understand that when we look at this data, we are talking in broad terms, but there are those local differences, that students are willing to quarantine, to vaccinate, and in order to be able to arrive on campus and have that blended hybrid teaching. But there are concerns about that online learning and the fact that they will want to transition and get some face-to-face on campus teaching at some point during their studies. So the survey background, looking really at Crossroads 4, so our latest iteration of this research. Overall, we've had about 20,000 responses. In this one, we've had around about 16,000 responses. We surveyed students online. It was an online survey. Took just under 15 minutes, quarter of an hour for them to complete, and it was in the field. So students were filling this in between the 18th of March and the 5th of April 2021. We had a huge number of different countries, or students from different countries taking part in the survey, but the magic number of having at least 100 respondents was from 14 countries, and that's a really important number because it means that significantly, statistically, it's significant, and we can use them in some of the filtering that we want to do in order to understand exactly what's happening in the different countries. So really robust, statistically relevant numbers throughout the research. So looking at the respondent profile, the majority are from India, so they reflect really where IDP does most of its work, which is in India. But as I said, really good responses as well from places like Philippines, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Nepal, Indonesia, Kenya, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and China. So taking in the majority of the major destination countries, source countries that international students come from. Probably more importantly is looking at their study status. So what's really important to understand is that these aren't speculative top of the funnel applicants or inquiries who haven't made decisions about where and when they want to study. Nearly 40% of the people who filled in the survey are offer holders, so they're already holding an offer with an institution overseas. We've got 10% that are pending an offer, and we've got just under a fifth who are already studying and the current international students. Within that, there's a mixture of those studying in their home country and those who have travelled and are studying overseas. We've got just under 10% who are put their studies on hold, and that's a really important cohort within the study to understand why they've put them on hold and what needs to happen for them to reintroduce the idea of studying overseas. We've got a very small number who've withdrawn. Then we've got 20% that aren't applied but are thinking about applying. So we've questioned them on what the decision-making process is at this point, and we know that they're highly relevant students because they're classified at IDP as qualified warm leads, so we know they are about to go overseas to study. And then we've got 2% who in the end decide to study in their home country. So really relevant set of audience and set of respondents for this research. And then finally, a good spread across the key destination countries of Australia, Canada, UK, US, and a slightly smaller amount for New Zealand as well. So what I'm going to do is talk you through the perception. So how do students perceive the key destination countries, and how has that changed over the course of the pandemic? So first of all, we're going to look at response to coronavirus. How do students perceive the top destination countries in terms of how they've handled the pandemic? And we've looked at the results across the 4 surveys that we've undertaken in April 2020, June 2020, October 2020, and then the latest one in April 21. And what we can see is that overall, looking at the green lines on the right hand side, you can see that for the majority of the time, the perceptions of how countries have handled the pandemic has improved as we've gone through, with 3 minor blips to that. So Australia, when it remained closed back in October, saw perceptions of how they handled it decline. A small decline for Canada, as students back in the fall found it quite hard to navigate and understand the policies in Canada for a short period of whether it was open to students or closed to students, and how they could arrive or not into the country. And New Zealand, again, who have remained closed to international students throughout, a negative reading there. However, since then, since October, we've seen all of the countries that their perceptions improve, although Canada does lag behind Australia and New Zealand in terms of response to coronavirus, but ahead of the UK and the States, who have both, whilst behind, have made up some ground over the course of the last year. So these perceptions are really, really important, especially to Chinese students, in terms of how institutions, but more importantly countries, have responded to the virus. So if we move on to the next slide, then what we see here is the same questions across a number of different factors. So what we've just looked at, response to coronavirus, seeing New Zealand out there in front, followed by Australia, closely followed by Canada, with the UK and US lagging some way behind. We go down the next level, safety of citizens and visitors. Again, we've got New Zealand out in front, but this time closely followed by Canada. Then we get into a category which is really specific to international students and international education, and that's the welfare of international students. And what we see is Canada well out in front in terms of how students perceive Canada over the other competing destination countries. So really positive on that specific. We then look at the economic stability of the nation, which is important to international students who are looking to work often while they study, and to work in the country once they've graduated. And we see that all of the countries really coming close together there, and very little differentiation between any of the destination countries, although Canada out there in front still. We then question them about the policies for international students. So again, one of these specific areas that is really just questioning aspects of international education. And again, Canada right out in front, and then clumped together some way behind. We've got New Zealand, UK and Australia, and then US even further behind. And then again, the final factor we questioned them on, again, a really specific one for international students, which is around perceptions of post-study work visa and post-study work policies. So do the students feel they're welcomed and able to stay in the country and get jobs once they've graduated? And again, Canada well out in front compared to the other competing nations of UK, US, Australia and New Zealand. So I think when you look overall, really good response for Canada in terms of how the country is perceived. But when you then pick it out, those key categories specifically around international students and international education, Canada is really ahead of the competition. So very, very good news for those watching today. So that's the bit that I wanted to cover for you all. So handing over now to cover student intentions.
So moving on to student intentions. On this first slide, we are looking at a small decrease in the percentage of respondents intending to commence as planned. So this was the second, though, of the 4 surveys, this was the second high level of intent to study as planned across all of the 4 surveys. We saw small increases of those not intending to study as planned, given the highest percentage of no across the 4 surveys, but it's important to note that that was still below 10%, which is a good sign. And we had the second lowest percentage of I don't know across the whole surveys. So moving on to the next slide, we're looking at student attitudes towards delivery, and so short-term scenarios, and how in the short term, we're looking at how teaching and learning and delivery still remains a key consideration. So we asked students, as border restrictions remain in place for many countries, institutions have begun programs, courses with online delivery. In this regard, please tell us which of the following statements is closest to your current mindset. And this is key because it could suggest, as we see here, a higher number of deferrals. So 31% will defer until they can study face-to-face. 43%, as you can see in orange, will begin online and transfer to face-to-face when it becomes available. 11% are undecided still, and 10% will commence even if the course is fully online. So again, this is just continuing to highlight that need for the on-campus experience, that the students still desire the on-campus experience, regardless of the ongoing restrictions. So moving on to the next slide. Interesting here to look at the attitudes towards vaccinations. So we see that while there is some hesitancy around vaccinations, the majority will be vaccinated and are willing to pay. So looking at the pie chart, 56% are willing to be vaccinated if vaccination passports are required. However, 30% state that they will need more information about the vaccine before making a decision, and 5% will wait until a vaccine passport is no longer required. So I think this again speaks to that need for clear, consistent communication, both about the vaccines from national health authorities and provincial health authorities, but also about the institution policies and procedures with respect to this. So just under 2/3 would prefer to be vaccinated before leaving their home country, with just under 1/3 preferring to be vaccinated upon arrival into Canada. 79% of the respondents are willing to pay for some of the cost of the vaccination. But the suggestion here is that the share education on safety of vaccines, simplify, make the complex clear, etc. And potentially some are looking at shared costs of vaccinations. So looking on to the next slide. So from our previous survey, we knew that 92% of students were willing to quarantine upon arrival. However, they're not as accepting of the costs of this. So 28% are willing to pay the full cost of quarantine. 43 expect to pay a portion of the costs, and 28% are really not willing to pay any of the costs. Of those that are not willing to pay the costs, 68% believe that it's the joint responsibility of the government and the institution to pay. Moving on to the next slide, we're going to pass it back to Mike to go through a few key takeaways from this survey.
Great, thanks. I think first of all, just start by saying, like, when we prepared this presentation and Christine and Joan and I were talking about what to choose and bring forward from the Crossroads and from this latest data, really what we have here is just the tip of the iceberg on what's available in this survey results. There's just a treasure trove of information that I think any international educator really needs to be aware of. So I'd encourage you, we're going to be releasing the full findings of this on the 28th of this month, and you'll be able to go to the IDP Connect website and go through and get a lot more information through our press release. As well, I'd encourage you to reach out to Christine, myself, or any of the IDP Connect team here in Canada if you'd like to see how this data can be used more specifically for your context, or if there's anything we can do to work with you in terms of this data. So I just thought I'd put that out there. If I can get the next slide, and we'll take a look at these key takeaways. What does it all mean? And there's a lot to unpack here. And actually, before I go into these actual slides, I'm going to talk about like the whole quarantining and this piece and students being willing to pay for it. You know, as lots of students start to make their way to Canada, we're all hearing these stories. I know a student who arrived in Vancouver from India not too long ago, last week, tested negative in Delhi, tested positive in Vancouver, and now has a 14-day stay in the hotel and well over $5,000 of fees. This is getting out there among the network, among students, and so it's a concern, and it's something that we're going to have to be able to deal with in our communication and prepare students that, one, this is a possibility, but two, to encourage any supports that we can provide along the way. So we're seeing more and more of this as being a concern. Going back and looking over at the overall picture of what we've seen today, I mean, wrote here at the top, there's significant opportunities for Canadian institutions, but competition is fierce inside and outside the country. You know, one of the clear things that have come through is that students are expecting a return to normal. The fully online program is no longer optional. We've seen that from a whole different set of questions here that we looked at in different slides, that they expect to be face-to-face as soon as possible. Christine's become kind of famous for her Amy Winehouse impersonation that she did on a presentation the other day, when the slide said, do you want to do online? And it was no, no, no. You do want to do face-to-face, it's yes, yes, yes. So really having the communication around there, and that also looks to the point that we make in number 5, is clear communication on vaccination and quarantine policies are really, really needed. These students need to know what to expect. And I think when you look at the brand of Canada as a whole, the messaging coming from BC to the messaging coming to Ontario is very different. And there's confusion in the market. So whatever we can do to clarify that as much as possible from the institutional level, provincial level, and national level over the coming months is going to be absolutely essential. Number 2, Canada is being viewed extremely positively right now. And as Jonah went through those slides about perception, the Canadian flag was either in the front or right at the front of basically every one of those queries. We have a real advantage of perception of how we're handling COVID, perception of the safety and the whole student experience here is really, really strong. And I mentioned before, we see the US surging, we see UK being strong, and that Australia will come back. I think there's a window right now that we need to be taking advantage of this positive perception towards our national brand and really getting out the messages of our individual institutions and reaching out to students and our agent partners and other partners to really say that, you know, we're here and we want these international students. I mentioned already that the US is rallying. I'll just kind of change that. Perception and demand are fickle. We see in this high-level search demand that quick policies, the US election or post-grad work rights in the UK have an immediate impact on the student perception of a country. So we can't just sit back and say, oh, we have it made, you know, things are all good. We really need to be mindful, strategic, and purposeful in what we're doing. Last thing I'll say, and it's just something I've noticed over the last couple of weeks, is that I have never seen the competition within Canada as fierce as it is right now for international students as we look to recover from the pandemic. I compiled over the last couple of weeks a sample of the promotions that are being happening from colleges and universities in Canada. And I've never seen the extent of scholarshiping, agent counselor bonus, application fee waivers. It is really, really significant what's happening out there in terms of competition. So again, it goes back to this thing of any advantage that you have and being very, very purposeful and knowing that students are willing to change study destination if they believe that they're getting a better response from an institution in BC than the institution that they have an offer with in Ontario. The mobility is very, very high and the competition is very, very high. So I would just say, I know it seems like this road and on the pandemic COVID student recruitment has been a long journey, and I think fatigue is setting in, and it's been setting in for a while, but we're not completely across the finish line to make sure we have a really successful fall and moving into January into the next year, and really focusing on our student engagement piece and really communicating these things that we've talked about throughout the webinar to our prospective students and to our international partners is absolutely essential. I think I'll leave it at there for my takeaways. Again, we'd love to continue this conversation with any of you on an individual basis, and thank you for listening to us today, and appreciate this opportunity. Please do reach out to us at any time if you have questions. Christine, back to you.
Thanks so much, Mike. Thank you, Jonah. As Mike said, we'd be thrilled to speak to you. We're here at the conference this week, and you can reach out to us anytime. My contact information is here, christine.walk@idp.com, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.